Coral Reefs of the World, written by Edward Allen Kurtz. Contents at a glance. What is a coral reef? A coral reef is an underwater area made up of corals. A coral might look like a rock, but it is a community or colony of living animals called polyps. There are several kinds of plants that live in coral reefs, but most people know more about the animals that live in a coral reef like crabs, fish, and sea turtles. When we think about coral reefs, we usually think about warm tropical places like Hawaii and the Caribbean. But did you know there are Coral Reefs of the World, written by Edward Allen Kurtz. Contents at a glance. What is a coral reef? A coral reef is an underwater area made up of corals. A coral might look like a rock, but it is a community or colony of living animals called polyps. There are several kinds of plants that live in coral reefs, but most people know more about the animals that live in a coral reef like crabs, fish, and sea turtles. When we think about coral reefs, we usually think about warm tropical places like Hawaii and the Caribbean. But did you know there are coral reefs in Norway? Let's learn more about coral reefs. How a coral reef is formed. Coral reefs are made up of groups of corals. A coral is made of the skeletons of polyps. A polyp is a marine invertebrate. This means that it is a kind of animal that does not have a backbone. A polyp forms an exoskeleton. This means that its skeleton is outside of its body instead of inside. Polyps continue to build skeletons, one on top of the next. They leave the lower skeletons, so only the top layer of the coral has living polyps. Many corals are built next to each other over a long period, and eventually we have a coral reef. Types of coral reefs. There are many kinds of coral reefs. An atoll reef is a reef in the shape of a circle. In the middle is a lagoon filled with water, but no island. A barrier reef, like the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, is a reef that is separated from the mainland by a channel of water. A fringing reef is attached directly to the shore, or is separated from it by a very narrow and shallow channel of water. A cay is a small, low sandy island built on top of a coral reef. A patch reef is a small reef in the shape of a circle, but is usually found inside of a lagoon. Parts of a coral reef. A coral reef is made up of several parts. The top is called the reef surface, and it is the shallowest part of the coral reef. The tides of oceans rise and fall, so sometimes there is more water covering the reef surface than at other times. The sandy sea floor around the corals is called the off-reef floor. The reef face is the area above the sandy floor. This is where most of the reef wildlife lives because there is food and protection here. The reef drop-off is the area where the shallow water becomes deeper as it moves away from the reef. Shapes of corals. If you ever visit a coral reef, you will see that corals come in many shapes and sizes. The wrinkled brain is one shape that many people know about. They are usually round and have grooves that look like a brain. A staghorn coral looks like it has antlers or branches. This kind of coral grows very fast. Elkhorn coral is another kind of coral that is shaped like a staghorn coral. Another coral shape is called a tabletop coral. These usually grow in shallow water. Pillar corals grow straight up like a pillar and look like fingers. Where coral reefs are found. Scientists think that coral reefs cover over 100,000 square miles of the ocean. That sounds like a lot, but it's really less than 0.1% of the ocean's surface area. About 90% of the world's coral reefs are found in the Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, around Southeast Asia, and in the Red Sea. The famous Great Barrier Reef is found in the Pacific Ocean. There are also reefs in the Atlantic Ocean and in the Caribbean Sea. It was only in the year 2000 that scientists discovered coral reefs in the cold waters of Norway's fjords. Coral reefs and people. Coral reefs are a very important part of the world's oceans. They are the home of about 25% of all marine life on Earth. They also protect islands and shorelines from constant wave action. But today, coral reefs are dying, and we must try to protect them. Some of the things that hurt coral reefs are too much fishing, pollution, and digging of canals through reefs to islands and bays. Sea levels are also rising, and this is not good for coral reefs. Some countries make coral reefs into parks so that they can be protected. Famous coral reefs, the Great Barrier Reef. The Great Barrier Reef off the eastern coast of Australia is the biggest coral reef system in the world. It is made up of nearly 3,000 coral reefs and 900 islands. This system stretches for 1,400 miles in the Coral Sea off the coast of Queensland in Australia. It can be seen from outer space. It is the biggest thing made out of living animals on the Earth. It is a popular place for people to visit and see the reef and its many animals. There are 1,500 different kinds of fish here, along with dolphins, porpoises, and whales. Famous coral reefs, the Red Sea Coral Reef. The Red Sea lies between the continent of Africa and the continent of Asia. It connects to the Indian Ocean at the south, and because of the man-made Suez Canal, it connects at the north to the Mediterranean Sea. The coral reef in the Red Sea stretches for 1,240 miles, and because the water is deep, the coral reefs are healthy. The coral reefs are found near Egypt, Eritrea, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Sudan. Some of the reefs are up to 7,000 years old. There are many kinds of fish that live in the Red Sea coral reefs, including sharks. Famous coral reefs, the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef. The Mesoamerican Barrier Reef is the biggest coral reef in the Atlantic Ocean and the biggest coral reef in the Western Hemisphere. It is 700 miles long and stretches from Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula to the islands off the coast of Honduras. There are many kinds of animals that live here, including manatees, whale sharks, and sea turtles, like the green sea turtle, hawksbill, leatherback, loggerhead, and olive ridley. About 2 million people live along the coastline, so scientists are trying to think of ways to protect the reef. Famous coral reefs, fjord coral reefs. It's hard to believe, but there are coral reefs in the cold waters of fjords like those found along the western coast of Norway. These coral reefs were only discovered recently by scientists. In the year 2000, they found what they call cold water reefs in the fjords. Fjords are very deep, so the animals that live in these coral reefs are very different from the wildlife in warm tropical reefs. Here the water is very deep, so animals that live here must learn how to live in water that is not only very dark, but has high water pressure. Coral reef fauna. Although they make up less than 0.1% of the world's ocean surface area, 25% of all the marine animals on Earth live in coral reefs. Some marine animals live permanently in coral reefs, while others pass through it as they travel around the oceans. The biggest number of animals in a coral reef are the polyps that make up the corals. A coral reef is also home to many kinds of fascinating animals like anemones, crabs, fish, lobsters, octopuses, rays, sea stars, sea urchins, sharks, shrimp, snails, sponges, and worms. Coral reef flora. Coral reefs have a huge number of different kinds of animals. There are also many kinds of plants that live here, and they are important to the reef. Sea grasses live here. They include grasses like manatee grass, shoal grass, and turtle grass. Sea grasses are important because they provide hiding places for small coral reef animals like lobsters. Several kinds of blue-green algae live in coral reefs. They are usually dark in color and look spongy. There are also some kinds of red algae and brown algae that live in reefs. Interesting facts. There have been coral reefs for millions of years. Coral reefs usually only grow in water that is less than 150 feet deep, but some reefs can grow in water that is up to 450 feet deep. The number of animals that live in a coral reef depends on where the coral reef is located and the flow of the water. Coral reefs grow very slowly. The temperature of the water where coral reefs grow best is between 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Polyps are related to sea anemones and jellyfish. The skeleton formed by polyps is made of limestone. A polyp has a tentacle that it uses at night to sting and eat animals like plankton and other tiny animals. The bright colors of some corals come from the algae that live on them. The algae needs sunlight to grow, so that is why corals usually grow in shallow water where the sunlight can reach them. Algae get their food from the sun through photosynthesis. Some of the fish and other marine animals that live in a coral reef include angelfish, clownfish, cuttlefish, eels, lionfish, octopus, parrotfish, pufferfish, seahorses, sharks, and starfish. The coral reef in the Florida Keys is the only barrier reef system in North America. If a coral reef loses its bright colors, it is because of a pollution problem. This loss of color is called bleaching.